So in an earlier video, I explored the very important question of what we as humans can learn about negotiation from our beloved dogs. Today, I am turning that question around, and I'm going to answer the perennial question that I get from all sorts of friends who know that I am a negotiation professor who is also completely in love with my BFF, my Golden Retriever Rosie. And that question is, how do I negotiate with my dog? At the end of this video, you will have some time-tested tricks that will increase the likelihood that your dog will behave and that are consistent both with negotiation research and theory and, importantly, with lived practice. But first, I'm guessing that at least some of you who watch my channel are thinking, oh my gosh, Bob, really? You are taking this too far. I mean, you don't really think you can negotiate with a creature that doesn't even talk. So if you're thinking that right now, let me remind you of this carefully crafted definition that we have on this channel for negotiation. Negotiation is any communication, written or spoken, verbal or nonverbal, any communication with an intention to influence or to persuade. And so using that definition, I am going to double down and say, absolutely. We are always negotiating with our dogs because we are always trying to do things to influence or change or modify their behavior. So I'm going to offer you 5 tips here, tips that are consistent with negotiation research, and as I said, that I have found work. And this comes from not just me, but also really dog whisperer friends that I know. And the most important lesson is to be clear, direct, and consistent. Meaning that you need to set some expectations for what is okay for your dog to do and what is not okay for your dog to do. And I would say that the earlier you can do this in your relationship with your dog, the better it will be for both of you. Now, I was fortunate enough to literally get Rosie when she was 8 weeks old, meaning that I started with her when she was a little puppy. But even if you're getting a rescue dog that might be 1 or 2 or 3 years old, you can still be clear and consistent. So for example, if you don't want that dog to be on the couch, anytime the dog starts to go on the couch, you need to correct the dog and say no. Clarity and consistency is consistent with research that has been done by University of Michigan professor Robert Axelrod, where he looks at game theory strategies that are most successful in negotiation. And one of the 4 rules that he has put forward is that clarity and consistency in behavior tends to win the day. Second important tip is to reward good behavior immediately. Meaning that when your dog complies, you need to reinforce that behavior. So in dog world, that might be a treat. It might be a pat on the head. It might be a little tummy rub. In negotiation, when others act in ways that are consistent with our expectations, we want to show appreciation. In fact, research done by Roger Fisher and Dan Shapiro on emotional needs in negotiation have shown that feeling appreciated is one of the biggest levers in creating positive emotions. And when someone isn't feeling appreciated, it tends to produce a negative emotion that then leads to destructive behavior. And what works for humans also works for dogs. Relatedly is communicating very clearly when behavior is bad or unacceptable and doing that immediately. Part of the reason why it's important to do that immediately for a dog is that they need to be able to connect the bad behavior to the evaluation. So if your dog is playing and ends up eating a whole bunch of grass, later on saying to the dog, you're not going to have dinner tonight, doesn't work because they can't connect the bad behavior to the punishment. There's a similarity here, I think, when it comes to human beings. The correction might not need to be immediate, but you need to show them, but you need to draw a clear line of why you're changing what you're doing in reaction to something that they have done that feels lacking in trust, inconsistent with expectations, or not what they agreed to. Fourth is strive to be as positive as you can. So dogs tend to react to behaviors that are reinforcing of good behavior. And when they are shamed, they tend to react more defensively, and it breaks bonds of trust. It breaks your connection with your animal. I would say the same is true in our negotiations with friends and family. If I'm having a difficult conversation with somebody and all I'm doing is focusing on what they did wrong and the ways in which they've let me down, the role I'm giving them is as letdown, failure, not living up to expectations. But if I can somehow switch that and give them a more positive role and saying, I'm confused at why you've decided to do A, B, or C. Can you please help me understand? Please educate me about what I'm missing. That positive frame is going to be much more motivating. And so that works again for human beings, but it also works for dogs. Lastly is be firm. Or in other words, don't be a sucker. I think this is actually harder to do with dogs than with humans, but it can be challenging in all situations. By be firm, we don't mean be difficult, but it does mean working to preserve your own interests. So going back to that example of being on the couch, if your dog is anything like mine, she will put on this really sad face and maybe start to paw you. What they're trying to do is use sympathy to get you to bend your rule. But if you want to get long-term compliance, it's really important to stay firm. Similarly, when negotiating with counterparts, if your tendency in the face of somebody who's using hard bargaining tactics is to ultimately give in, you reinforce for them the idea that that behavior is effective. So this is a challenge I always have with my mom because my dog Rosie really likes to beg for food. And unfortunately, ultimately, my mom is a sucker. So the longer Rosie sits there and she starts to drool and she puts on this cute little face, ultimately, Rosie gets a piece of cheese. And I think it's not coincidental that when I'm eating, my dog is usually somewhere in a corner. But when my mom joins the table, so does Rosie. So let's review. In order to negotiate with a dog effectively, you want to first be clear and consistent over time. Secondly, reward good behavior immediately. When there's bad behavior, make sure you correct it immediately so that your dog can be aware, can make the connection between your disapproval and the bad behavior. Fourth, strive to be as positive as you can be with your dog. And finally, be firm, don't be a sucker. So I hope you'll keep watching this next video on quiet quitting your family. It's about how to negotiate with family members more effectively. In addition, I hope you'll be positive by liking this video, ringing the bell, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to this channel. Thanks so much. Click, 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 bark, bark, bark.